Today's sponsor is Project Pals, an amazing collaborative workspace for students to create and work with projects. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn more about getting started for free and how I'm using Project Pals in my classroom.
Rewiring Education. Lessons learned from Apple's first Vice President of Education, John Couch.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Today is such an exciting day. We have the author of Rewiring Education, John Couch. Now, John, you have the distinction of being the first person that Steve Jobs hired to be Apple's first vice president of education. Did you have any idea that education would be transformed by the products that you began to work with?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think, from the very beginning, being the 54th person hired at Apple Computer and working with Steve in the very beginning, education was always in Steve's DNA. And he saw technology really as an amplifier for one's intellect. Same way that a bicycle amplifies one's physical ability, he saw technology amplifying one's creative ability to be innovative and creative and to be able to go places with the technology that you couldn't go without the technology.
Tell us a little bit about some of the research that came up with this challenge-based learning framework.
Sure. Well, actually, Apple has done a number of research projects. The first research project, which your audience is probably familiar with, was ACOT, Apple's Classroom of Tomorrow. It was a 12-year longitudinal study, which is a very simple result, and that is if the students are engaged, they're going to learn. I decided when I came back to launch Apple's Classroom of Tomorrow today, given that the technology had moved to mobility, the internet had been created, and the results came back calling for an entirely different pedagogy in the classroom, replacing memorization with a challenge that is relevant to the students, where the students work in teams collaboratively. When I was in school, collaboration was called cheating. Every project was a single-person project. And then finally, creative, where the students are now creating the content rather than just simply consuming the content. So the framework became relevant, creative, collaborative, and challenging.
This study happened some time ago, and your book, is Rewiring Education. Do you feel like that education is changing and is adapting in this way, or do you feel like we have a long way to go?
Both. I like to say the revolution has started. It's just not equally distributed. There are many, many schools, both in K-12, even at the university, that are using the CBL, the challenge-based learning framework. On the other hand, unfortunately, I would have to say that the majority of schools that are using technology only in a substitution manner. And that is, they're doing the same thing they did in the past, but this time using technology.
What needs to change?
Well, we have to first and foremost realize that, our public school system was really defined by the Board of Education, which was funded by Rockefeller in 1912 to produce individuals that would work on a factory line. So they really didn't want individuality. They wanted everyone to be the same, to operate at the same, and not to challenge the status quo. And that was even true for the managers of the factory workers. They really wanted managers who simply followed instructions, who weren't necessarily creative and innovative, and they could pay them less. So we really haven't changed much in 100 years. So, the book really was written to start a conversation, if you will, to get people to realize that, one, this is a generation of students who've grown up with technology. They have more functionality in their social environments than they do in their learning environments. And then we really needed to change the pedagogy from this memorization to something that allows students to solve problems whose answers aren't in the back of the book under odd.
Mm-hmm. So, John, there have been some headlines that have come across lately in some major magazines and newspapers that Many people in Silicon Valley don't allow their students to go to schools that use technology. Have you found this to be true? Is that an overgeneralization, or do you believe that that's false?
I have not seen that to be true in any way, shape, or form. I think, people want to use technology responsibly. And I think, Dr. Putendara, who did the long study with the Maine Learning Initiative and who developed the SAMR model that said technology can be used as a substitution or augmentation or modification, but it really needs to be used in terms of redefining the way we learn.
As you talk to K-12 teachers across the world, listening to you right now, could you give us a pep talk or encouragement of what we need to do that we can impact our classrooms, or do we have to wait for administrators to give us some kind of permission or hand something down?
No, I think, education is not going to change top down. It's going to change bottom up. It's going to change as parents become more aware of the possibilities of technology redefining the classroom. It's going to change as teachers become more comfortable with frameworks like challenge-based learning. The last chapter in the book is a call to action, and it's Gandhi's quote, "Be the change." Yeah, I think maybe the best way for your listeners is for me to give an example of what challenge-based learning is. And since I'm in California, and most Californians realize and know that in fourth grade we take California history. Unfortunately, that usually tends to be a project, a single-person project to build a mission. No reference to presidios, no reference to the relationship between the Mexican community and the American community. Very little in the textbook, just enough for the publisher to get the textbook approved by the adoption people. And so the example that I use in the book is you are William Randolph Hearst. Group the students into groups, and the students have to discover who William Randolph Hearst is. They discover that he was the owner of the Examiner, that he built Hearst Castle, which was a collection from all over the world of artifacts, of animals, of art. So they really get outside of California. And your challenge is to throw a dinner party for those individuals who made the biggest impact on California. Who would you invite, and what would the seating chart be like?
Wow, that is a challenge.
Yeah, and you can see the students are going to learn so much more about not only California history, but the impact of the world's culture on California as well.
But does this model require a changing role of the teacher? And what would you say that my role as a teacher will look like under the challenge-based learning model?
Yeah, I mean, it basically makes the student and the teacher symbiotic. They're now partners in the learning exercise, because there's a very good chance that the teacher doesn't understand the answer to the challenge. One that we used in Southern California in the desert was simply, is my water safe to drink? Because there had been rumors that the arsenic level in the water down in the Coachella Valley was high due to dumping on the Indian reservations. Well, that's a challenge that the teacher doesn't have an answer. So they work side by side with the students, guiding the students in the process to meet the challenge.
So there's a slight difference in words here. Some teachers have heard the term problem-based learning before. You're using the term challenge-based learning. I'm assuming that's intentional. Why the word challenge versus problem?
Well, the challenge needs to be relevant. Now, if you're living in Coachella Valley and there's a concern and a rumor that the arsenic level is high in your water, and you're given the challenge to find, a solution, it's a challenge. It's not just a project or a problem. So the kids are grouped in groups of 3 and 4. They're given colored beads that represent the different elements in the water. They have to discover what element they have. And as they put the elements together, they realize there are carcinogenic elements in their water. Then they have to start to ask the question, well, who determines what's safe? So basically it becomes a framework for for learning and learning outside the line.
So last question, John, if the person who hired you, Steve Jobs, if he was alive today, what do you think that he would think about education today? Because it seems like we're still talking about a lot of the same stuff for quite some time.
Yeah, well, I think Steve would look to education to be digital, to look at the content all available. I happen to believe the content will be free. The challenge of the teacher putting that content in a relevant, collaborative, challenging, creative context. I think he would see assessment being built in and dynamically delivered to the student on a real-time basis. Sort of like the way iTunes says, if you like the Beatles, maybe you would like the Rolling Stones. So basically a digital learning environment that understands what the gaps are and the strengths of any particular individual student, and then delivers to that student in real time learning activities that help them either overcome those gaps or stretch their understanding.
So, John, you think AI is a big part of the software that needs to be designed for students to be more adaptive?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on forthcoming technologies, adaptive, technologies, AI, augmented reality, holograms, a number of technologies that will, I believe, impact the learning environment.
Thank you. So the book is Rewiring Education by John Couch. And there's a lot of exciting and interesting concepts here. I remember when I got my first Mac SE in 1987 as I was heading to Georgia Tech, and it transformed my learning, and it still does. I'm glad to see, John, that you're very optimistic. I know sometimes it's easy to get a little frustrated and say, why isn't this changing faster? But I know that we are moving forward. And perhaps, like you said, it's just everybody's not moving forward at the same pace, and that's what needs to happen. So thank you, John.
You bet. Well, let me just wrap up with, I don't have a monopoly on creativity, so I have instituted on the rewiringeducation.com page a teacher award where teachers can submit the unique and creative things that they're doing in the classrooms on behalf of the students. Winner will get an iPad classroom and a trip to Silicon Valley to meet with me and possibly some other individuals that I won't name right now.
Okay, awesome. The Rewiring Education website, do check the show notes. We will link to that. Today's sponsor is Project Pals. Project Pals has a useful classroom collaborative platform that lets you create and manage projects for your students. Right now, my students are creating and managing a project as they're creating a podcast to record powerful stories from the recent storms in our area. Project Pals connects with Google Classroom, but also lets me see the detail on which students are contributing and participating. I also love the task board, which is a Trello-like Kanban board that lets students create, assign, and complete tasks. You can also link in Google Docs and do brainstorming and so much more. It's really a very powerful tool. I will be featuring this tool on my blog and newsletter this week. So go to projectpals.com. That's projectpals.com and sign up today.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.